Hi, this is Brent with Sample Tools from CR2, and in this video I'm going to be showing you how to make some interesting transitions for this deep house loop that I've got here. So let's have a listen to the loop to begin with. So if you're wondering, guys, all of the sounds here are being used in simpler or as a raw audio form like this one here. And these are all from Deep House 3. So this is a synth hit, then we got a bass hit, and the kick and the percussion loops are also from the same pack. And I've just done a little bit of light processing. But the goal now is how do we make this loop into a full track? And a big way to do that is to implement some transitions to get you from section to section. I'm going to look at 3 different types of transitions, and we're going to be creating them from scratch. And the transitions we're going to be creating are some rises, impacts, and also just some smaller sort of reverse hits and transitions to create interest along the loop and also to get you from a different section. So let's have a look at the most basic form of doing this with just some hats from Deep House 3. So I've hit Command-Shift-B and I open my browser. I'm going to come to my sample tools collection here, and I'm going to go to my drum hits, and I'm just going to have a look at these hats here. Okay, I'm going to take this one here, drag it into the project, and this is basically as simple as it gets in terms of creating transitions, but it's still a really powerful technique which you can use, and it makes things sound a lot better. What I'm going to do is I'm going to hit R on my keyboard to reverse this sample, and now I'm going to apply a fade. I could do this in a simpler, but I really don't need that much control. This is just a really good way to get things moving along as you're working. And now I just have to decide where exactly I need this. I would probably put it towards the end of a section, and you could maybe time stretch it in something like simpler if you wanted to make it fit a little bit better. I'm just doing it on the grid here. So we'll roughly have it here. And then the best thing you can do now is add some time-based effects. So let's just use something like an echo. Let's have a look here, apply this, and then we could modulate the dry wet blend, and we have the riser. I'm going to pull down on the volume, and this would be a really good way to get out of this section and into something else to increase the energy. So let's check this out. So the hard sync left and right at a 8th note sounds really good for delaying the transition. If we take the loop off here and we hear that again, we'll hear how it could work going into a new section. And like I said, we could use a multitude of different samples for this. So again, going back to that sample tools folder, this is just one example of hats, but you could use snares, you could use claps, for example. I'm just going to grab this here, do exactly the same thing, reverse it, and then I'll zoom in and I'll just trim the sort of envelope of this sound. Make sure that we don't have anything at the end as well, so there's no awkward cut-offs. And this is a really simple but effective way to get between sections. You can add pre-shift before these as well if you want, but I think it's just a really good way to move between the sections. If you bring in a little bit of this reverb as well on the echo, it'll make it sound even nicer. And then maybe do some filtering as well to make this a little bit more interesting again. So we could use something really simple. We'll go into audio effects and just select something like an EQ8 or even an EQ3 would do, to be honest. And we'll just get rid of everything from below here and maybe get rid of the top end as well, so it's not too distracting if it's a transition in the middle. Or you could make it fully wet as well, and then we got a totally different, we're basically removing the whole transient and the whole dry signal of the original sample, and we can maybe resample this onto another layer using the resample feature of an audio track. So I set up an audio track, I'll use the resampling input and change the output of this track to 6 audio, and let's put this into record, and let's hear how this sounds. Okay, now let's go back and hear this sample. We might have to increase the gain, but I'll remove this previous layer now and have a listen to what we have from the resample. And now what you could do is you could maybe drag this into a simpler, save it as an instrument, and you could use it for future tracks to sort of help design your sound and your identity as an artist and your sort of go-to palette of sounds, which becomes something that you get used to doing with each individual track. You might reuse the same samples and tweak them, but it's good to have a starting base just so you don't let procrastination sink in. Okay, the second method, I'm going to use operator because, again, this is a synth that will come with pretty much all versions of Ableton. So if we head into our instruments, I'm going to grab the operator synth. And what I want to do is I want to select oscillator here. And on the wave input, I'm going to change this to a white noise riser. We're going to input some MIDI information here. And let's increase the length to, let's do the duration of this, so 8 bars, and let's put a note on. It doesn't really matter where, to be honest. And now we just need to extend the length of this loop to the full duration of the existing loop, fold the track so it's just one pure note all the way throughout, drag it for the duration, and I'll turn this down. This will sound pretty terrible to begin with, but all we have to do is apply some filtering and some special effects and it'll sound great. So to begin with, it's just a pure white noise oscillator. So what we want to do is, we want to apply a bandpass filter, which filters out the low and the high end. We'll keep it on a 24 dB slope, and we'll use this clean filter, because I don't really need to drive or impart any extra harmonics on this layer. And then what you want to do is, you want to basically right-click on the frequency, and we are going to show automation. And now we can basically automate this parameter over time to open up. And let's see how that sounds now. So we could maybe change the initial start time so it's not so low down, because we won't even hear it unless it's probably around 250 Hertz. And now the special part is if we add in that echo again, it'll make it sound a lot more interesting once again. So we'll grab the echo. And again, we could also automate and modulate some of the parameters on here. So let's do the same thing with the dry wet control. And again, we'll apply something quite similar to what we had done previously, a build right to the end. I'll start it off with some of the echo. And in context, let's hear how this sounds. I'm going to turn the reverb up and let's hear how this sounds in context. So it's a really, really great way to build the tension and the anticipation for the new energy in the new section over a long period of time as well, if you've got sort of like a static loop like this. So the third thing we're going to look at is we're going to use Serum, and I'm going to use a lot of processing to create an impact, and basically an impact is a really great way to introduce a brand new section. So let's go ahead and grab Serum, and the first thing I'm going to do is turn off this oscillator, and I'm going to come into Noise. And once again, I'm going to go back to my sample tools folder. I'm going to look for a kick drum. So let's go into the drum hits, kicks, and I'll layer one of these. Something like this, just kind of subby. Drag it onto the noise oscillator here. And I will input monitor my Serum layer. Okay, let's bring the level up and let's put it into one-shot mode. Okay, cool. And now I'm going to go back onto oscillator array. I'm going to change the shape to a basic shape. I'm looking for a sine wave because it's a very pure waveform, and I want to be playing this on an F, so I need to turn on keyboard tracking for the noise module now. Let's pitch this down 2 octaves. and I'm going to change the shape of this ADSR. This is the main VCA for all of the oscillators. Okay, now here's a little trick in Serum. Once I play something, I can then drag it out in the top left here. So I'm going to drag that out onto a new layer. And as we can see, we have exactly what we played in Serum. Now, the special sauce is when we start to layer this with textures. So I'm going to go back into Deep House 3. I'm going to search for textures, and they're in the effects folder. Let's have a listen to what we have. So I'm looking for something with a bit of a transient. Okay, that's the one there. And I'm going to chop this sample down. And I just basically want one of those transients. It doesn't have to be bang on the grid because we're going to be filtering it through a convolution reverb. Let's hear how these sound together roughly. So we'll solo both layers. And we'll get rid of that last bit there. And we're going to do the same thing again with the resampling layer now. I'm going to insert a new track. So insert a new audio track. Let's set it to resampling. And let's select the output here to the 10 audio as well. You could name these if you want later on. And let's just attenuate the level of the textural loop so it's a lot lower. Okay, and now what we're going to do is just hit record on this layer. Okay, so now let's have a listen to this track to see what this sounds like. Okay, still in quite a raw state. So what we're going to do is we're going to trim this sample up a bit, drag it onto the grid a bit more. And the secret sauce here is when you start to layer it with other effects. So I'm going to go into sound design and apply some saturation. I'm going to add soft clipping. I'll leave the drive state where it currently is. I'll drive it really hard and back the output off. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to layer in the kick again, because in the process I can still hear it, but I've lost a little bit of the transient. So let's layer this into here. And you could resample this again if you chose to. Okay, and now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into reverb. I'm going to use the fog convolver from AudioThing. There's also a free version for Ableton Live. I'm going to go into the spaces where we have some large impulse responses. So these are convolution reverbs. You can even drag your own WAV files on here to come up with some really unique textures. Let's look for something really, really big. Okay, it's a little bit too tight there. So maybe something more like a hall. That's much more like it. So now I'm going to apply the fade out. And I'm going to apply a high pass because I don't want any of that below 100, roughly 150. Okay, and then ideally we would resample this onto one more audio layer, and we could save this as a transition, and we could add more processing later on if we chose to fit each individual track. So we're going to set this once more to a resampling input. We're going to head for the output of 10. And again, the output of 10 on here. And now we just need to record this. I'm going to remove these two files now, and we should have our impact. So this is the combination of a couple of different processing techniques and a couple of different layers. We've got a nice chunky audio signal here, and the intention is we can reuse this to fit different tracks, and we can process it differently for each individual track. So the combination of the impact here and the bandpass on the white noise riser, and a simple reverse symbol takes the track from something that doesn't really move over time, which is something quite static, so one additional thing we could do is we could maybe take this impact, duplicate the track, and do a reverse version of this, like the symbol, and use this to transition out of this section into a new section. And now we see the pre-shift is going to make this impact even harder hitting. So let's have a listen to how we exit this section now.